Hello, everybody, and welcome to Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker. I'm Nick Palavita. I'll be your host for today's program. And we have a very exciting topic we're going to discuss today, which is something that affects everybody. If you haven't seen this article, you should. It's America's broken healthcare system, diagnosis and prescription. So with that, we're bringing some of our panelists that will be on today. The president of the Pod TV Network, Kim Calhoun. Kim, welcome to the show. We're going to have a great show today dealing with healthcare cost. With that, we also have Lee Newton Rhodes, who's a CPA who should be also interested in healthcare cost. And not the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States.
David.
Cost in general, since it's out of control in America. And then our special guest today, Dr. John Abramson, who actually wrote the article on this.
Hello.
Imprints, America's Broken Healthcare Diagnosis and Prescription. I fell out of my chair when I read that article because I don't know about you, I don't know about the people listening, but I don't like spending $2.3 trillion more in healthcare costs than we should. And when we go to other countries, they control their healthcare and we don't. It's like the United States is a bunch of drunken sailors. So could you share a little bit, John, about this article?
Sure. You described half of it very well. We're spending $12,900 per year per person in the United States. In the 11 other wealthy countries, they're spending about $6,000. And when you multiply that difference times 334 million Americans, that comes out to spending in excess $2.3 trillion. But that's not the big problem. The big problem is that the life expectancy of Americans has now fallen to 6.3 years less than the average of those countries that we're spending $2.3 trillion a year more than. So we're ruining our country economically, and health-wise, we're barely a first world country.
Okay. David M. Walker, I know that you talk a lot about the national debt and the trillions that we're in debt, but what about this healthcare issue? It seems like healthcare is out of control also as well. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, first, I think it's important to understand what my background is to be able to talk about this. You're right. I was Comptroller General of the United States, which is Chief Accountability Officer and Auditor General of the United States. And we did work on everything the federal government was doing or thinking about doing in the world, anywhere in the world, including healthcare. But I also was a trustee of Social Security and Medicare. I also was Assistant Secretary of Labor for pensions and healthcare. I also ran a human capital strategy practice for Arthur Andersen globally, which included healthcare. And so, I come to this from a variety of perspectives. I think the bottom line is, we spend a lot more than other industrialized nations on healthcare, and we get below average results. And other than interest, the fastest growing expense for the federal government is healthcare. And ultimately, we need to engage in a comprehensive reassessment of our healthcare system and appropriate division of responsibilities, how payments ought to be made, who ought to be making those payments, et cetera. And I'm happy to go into, if you want, the kind of feedback that I got from representative groups of voters when I did the 10 million a minute tour in 2012 about what type of reforms do we need to make to our healthcare system in order to reduce cost and improve outcomes, because that's really what it comes down to. And if you don't reform the healthcare system, you're not going to solve the financial challenge that the U.S. faces. And by the way, it's not just the government, not just the federal government. It's state and local government, it's employers, and it's individuals to the extent that they can't find affordable care. All you got to keep in mind, we now have the Affordable Care Act, and there are pluses and minuses with the Affordable Care Act. But those are my preliminary thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And John, you also wrote a book on this area. I think we have it right here, Sickening, which is available on Amazon.com, How Big Pharma Broke the Healthcare System. Can you tell us a little bit about this? Because it seems to me that Big Pharma controls the media. Because if you go to look at any news channel today, the next commercial you're going to get is going to be on a drug. And go talk to your doctor about this drug. Go talk to your doctor about that drug. Well, if they control the media, then they're controlling the conversation when it relates to healthcare in the United States. So what is your thoughts on this particular area in this book?
Nick, that's exactly right. I wrote a book. I was a family doc for 20 years. And when Vioxx went off the rails in 2002, an anti-inflammatory drug that eventually killed about 50,000 Americans without being a more effective drug, I decided to leave practice and write about what the FDA knew about this, what the New England Journal should have known about this, and how the New England Journal was propagating the wrong information. The book was published. A week later, Vioxx got pulled from the market. It wasn't a direct result of my efforts, but I was the guy who wrote the last book, and I was on the Today Show twice and made maybe 80 national TV appearances. Sickening is an update of what I wrote in 2004, based on 10 years I spent as an expert in litigation and consulting with the FBI and the Department of Justice. And I know a whole lot more about this problem now than I did in 2004. And Sickening has gotten virtually zero coverage from the conventional media. And I've heard, I don't know it's true. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead, David.
No. Finish your thought, John. I just wanted to comment on something when you're done. Go ahead.
Okay. So I've heard that there's an unwritten rule in TV, in commercial TV, that there's not a pharma critic to be on any segment that's bordered by a drug ad, which leaves no segments that are unbordered by drug ads. So this book tells the story of what's wrong with American healthcare, and I want to get into the problem underneath the surface as the discussion goes on. But the real problem is that the American people don't know about this because it's not in the commercial media's interest to bring them this information.
Well, Nick, one of the things that a significant majority of the American people supported as part of that tour that I talked about as one of many elements in a comprehensive healthcare solution was that the United States should not allow advertising of prescription drugs. Most industrialized nations do not allow it, in part because it fuels consumption. And that's not something we need to be doing right now. And John talks about, how it's also caused other challenges because since I think the drug companies are the number one advertisers on television, so obviously the media doesn't want to have a ban on advertising of prescription drugs. But the other challenge that you have is you can't get certain messages out because of the effective veto by the prescription drug industry. I will also note that one of the things that the supermajority of Americans supported as another element of care reform was to allow the federal government to be able to engage in competitive bidding for prescription drugs. There's only one federal agency at the time that was allowed to do that, and that was the Veterans Administration. And as part of the Inflation Reduction Act, which is probably the most false advertising name in the history of legislation, there was a component in it that dealt with the ability to allow Medicare to be able to engage in more negotiation of prescription drug prices. The problem is it's several years from now, and it's only a subset of the drugs. Okay, so I look forward to having some more conversation about this. At the end, I mean, at some point before I get to my hard stop at 11:30, I'd like to kind of give you a framework of what the public said that they would support, and then we can have a discussion about it, and then you can continue the discussion on that and anything else you want to in the last half hour.
Okay, Lee, you had a comment?
Yeah, just quick, John, you made a comment about the life expectancy dropping in the United States. Am I correct?
Correct.
Isn't that a positive thing in terms of healthcare costs coming down?
No, it's not working so well. We need a new strategy.
Why are bodies coming down but our costs going up?
Because the core reason is that commercial interests now control the air quotes knowledge that doctors get about how to practice medicine. They're funding most of the research. 96% of health research in the United States is about drugs and devices, but only about 20% of our health is accounted for by medical interventions. So what's happening is the drug companies are controlling the knowledge that doctors believe about how to practice. And what that's doing is sucking all the money away from the kinds of social, to improving the kinds of social determinants of health that control 80% of our health. But the docs who are really trying to do a good job, most of them, 99% are victims of this system. They're convinced that doing more tests and prescribing more expensive drugs is the way to get people good health. Our ratio of spending on medical care and social services is reversed from the other OECD countries. And that's the problem. But there's no commercial advantage to addressing American healthcare from that perspective. It's just shut out of the discussion.
Same thing with preventative care.
I think, John, you would also agree that COVID had something to do with it, at least on a short-term basis, right?
Well, David, COVID was really a stress test because the other countries had COVID too. We were 3.4 years behind them in 2019, and we went down to 6.3 years behind them after COVID. So the COVID just exposed the weakness in our healthcare system.
We didn't do as good a job. Right. I understand.
Right.
What I would respectfully suggest, Nick, is let me kind of cover at a high level the kind of reforms that a representative group of voters in swing states agreed that we ought to seriously consider. Okay. The first is very fundamental. We've never really had a conversation on how much universal health care should be provided in the United States. I didn't say if, I said how much. Right now, what we have is we have Medicare, which covers seniors 65 and over. We also have Medicaid, which covers the poor. We also have employer-provided arrangements, and we have the Affordable Care Act, which didn't exist before 2010, which gives an option for people to be able to buy healthcare at group rates, and depending upon what your income is, you get different levels of subsidies. But I might note that those subsidies go up to people making six figures in income. So another typical example of the federal government promising too much and subsidizing too many. So here's the first basic question was, how much universal care should the government provide so that no matter what your age is, no matter where you live, no matter what your income is that you have certain basic coverage you can count on, and we can separate that from the financing. And the answer was preventative and wellness and catastrophic. That everybody has a need for preventative and wellness. You want as big a pool as you can get for that, because employers don't have as much incentive for that because of workforce turnover, things of that nature. That's a societal issue. And then everybody wants unlimited health care as long as somebody else will pay for it. But ultimately, what they really need is they need protection against, serious illnesses that could wipe them out financially. Because as we all know, the number one cause of bankruptcy in the United States is healthcare. That's the number one cause of bankruptcy. So that's one thing. Okay. And, obviously catastrophic would vary based upon the level of income that you have and things of that nature. But this would be single pool, publicly financed, delivered through the private sector. The other thing that they talked about was we need to change our payment practices. We're paying, as John, I think, alluded to, we're paying for activities. Okay. And the more you do, the more you get paid, unless you mess up. Right. And then also an issue on that is, what about malpractice reform? We also need malpractice reform because, there needs to be some type of safe harbor as long as physicians, follow standards of practice determined by physicians, not determined by the government. Because in many cases you find, and I'd be interested in John's thoughts on this when I get done with this, in many cases you find physicians are doing things, they're doing more, prescribing more, because that's kind of standard practice, and they also get paid more for that. And if they don't mess up, they've got less of a likelihood of getting sued because of an omission, if you will. So we need more evidence-based payment practices. Other countries such as Germany have done that. We need to phase out the tax exclusion for employer-provided and paid health care. The number one tax preference in the Internal Revenue Code is the fact that individuals don't pay income taxes or payroll taxes on employer-provided and paid health care, no matter how lucrative the plan is. It's hundreds of billions a year. And that desensitizes individuals from their true level of compensation, the true cost of health care. We also need more transparency as to cost and quality with regard to health care, because people are not in a position to make an informed decision. I mentioned about medical malpractice laws. The other thing is you can't write a blank check for health care. Not even socialized countries write a blank check for health care. It'll bankrupt you. You have to have a limit as to how much you're willing to allocate. Other ideas that came out, including with regard to Medicaid, is to be able to have more income-based premium subsidies for Medicare and Medicaid, and to fund Medicaid through block grants, where basically you're establishing a minimum coverage level. If states want to do more than that, that's fine, but they're going to pay for it. And that the federal government's going to pay a certain amount per person, similar to what Germany does. They get paid a certain amount per person, and then which provides more of an incentive for them to be able to manage the cost. And as I said before, we've got to do more to enhance steps with regard to quality, and part of this is visibility. Last thing I'll say is I've always preached that you got to have three things for any system to be successful and sustainable over time. Properly designed incentives that encourage people to do the right thing and discourage them from doing the wrong thing. Adequate transparency, in this case, as to cost and quality, to provide reasonable assurance they will. And appropriate accountability if they don't, with rewards for people who do. So it's both sides. Incentives, transparency, accountability. Healthcare, 0 for 3. Strikeout.
Can I interrupt here for a second? I think we have a good health care program and people and doctors, but we have a pathetic payment program and reimbursement program for the doctors. The insurance doesn't really pay the doctors. They have to fight. They had to hire admin to cover and get the payments in, and more admin. I will predict in 10 years or less, we won't have any good doctors left in this country. And you want to know why it costs so much? Because the insurance companies are not paying them, and they have to increase their rates to get something or some kind of compensation. Malpractice, David, I agree with you on a lot of that. But the reason why they're not getting to be able to practice the way they want to is their hands are tied by insurance. Insurance dictates what they can and cannot do for people based on what they will or will not pay, or what you're eligible for. Or you might have to wait 3 to 6 months, and then it's too late because you had to wait for eligibility. I'm on a new program. I wish I had read it a little bit better because I had to switch programs. And, I have to go through a virtual doctor first, who then will get me into a PCP doctor, who will then say, I refer this, but now the insurance says, well, he refers it, but we want this doctor to refer it, and we want the virtual doctor to reevaluate it. And so by the time you get your medical care or anything done, you're probably dead. So what I'm going to say is, our problem isn't the health care. Our problem is the insurance. If we got rid of the insurance and paid into the system through our payroll, like you were saying, like a universal program, because we pay for Medicare and Medicaid anyway, up the ante on it because it's not going to be there anymore anyway, you would be able to make enough money if you're not paying insurance companies who pocket majority of the money, pay a lot of people who don't need to be paid for something that is not taking care of our health. Then you would be able to put that money towards more doctors. Now, the other problem our doctors have, their student debt is too high. I know so many doctors. I talk to them all the time, and they're so overwhelmed by student debt. They can't think about practicing medication. They can't think about what's in the best interest of the people because they can't take care of their own families or even buy a freaking house because their student debt is overwhelming. And you know what? I do not want to hear one more word from anyone about what they went out and partied with the money, because a lot of the doctors I know and kids that I watch grow up to become doctors who wanted to become doctors, they didn't go out and party. They worked very hard. So our problem does exist, but we
Hang on.
can't afford
I'm
it
just Googling
because of
something.
insurance companies. If you do away with insurance companies, get an automatic pay system like a blockchain program going in where money goes in and the doctors can collect and really get money, then I think that we would have less going out for prescriptions that were unnecessarily needed. I think doctors are just so overwhelmed with having to get through whatever the insurance will approve that it's easier to write a prescription than it is to just really treat, because they can't. Most of the time I get that, well, your insurance won't cover that. I'm going through something right now. Two of my doctors referred me, and the insurance company has a doctor, virtual care doctor. He goes, no, I don't refer that kind of stuff. Two of my medical doctors who have treated me for 30 plus years, who know me inside and out, their hands are being tied by insurance companies. So our medical industry is in a very bad mess, not because of prescriptions or anything else other than insurance companies have taken all of the money and they deny all of the treatments and hold the doctor's hands. You want to hold them accountable for prescribing or doing this? No, hold the insurance companies.
John,
And
why don't
get
you
rid
jump
of
in?
it.
Because
Get
I've
rid of
got less than 5 minutes left. So
Okay.
Kim,
Sorry.
for the record, you look really good. So
Oh, thanks.
you're muted, John.
Uh,
You're still muted. You're still muted. There you go.
Okay, am I here?
You're there.
You got me. Kim, I agree with you that insurance is a real problem, but there's a problem. We don't have much time, and I want to talk about a critical aspect of this that is below the surface of the water, and people who don't spend their lives looking at the data, the real data from clinical trials, don't understand the extent to which the knowledge that doctors believe is only knowledge that's manufactured, mostly knowledge that's manufactured by the commercial interests. So when an article is peer reviewed, we talk about evidence-based medicine, and an article is published in the New England Journal, and the peer reviewers peer reviewed it so the doctors can read the bottom line in the abstract and trust that it's true. The peer reviewers don't get the data. Peer reviewers don't get to look at the data from the articles. And the articles are mostly commercially funded and written with the participation, if not outright ghostwriting, by the commercial companies. So the doctors are getting the drug company's version of knowledge. They're not getting to see independently reanalyzed data. And that's just, you can't do science like that. It's nonsensical. It's not science without transparent analysis. And then David was talking about paying doctors to follow the guidelines, the community standards. The people who write the guidelines, they too don't get the actual data from the clinical trials. They just get the published trials. So they have to rely, it's like an echo chamber. So what's called evidence-based medicine, and what every medical student is just beaten until they accept it uncritically, that evidence-based medicine is the path to being a good doctor, forces them to rely on the drug industry's version of the best healthcare. And this situation, it's crazy. Doctors are charged with being learned intermediaries. Their patients trust them to be learned intermediaries who can take the best of medical science and put it to the service of each individual patient. What patients don't know, and critically what doctors don't know, is that they're in the position of the slaves in Plato's cave where the slaves had a fire, were chained in a cave and had a fire behind them. And they were looking at the shadows on the wall, the cave wall, and they thought that was reality. And doctors are trained to believe that they're seeing real science when they're seeing commercially motivated science. And this situation just has to be outed. The journals make money by not requiring that peer reviewers have access to data. And the journals, a major part of their income comes from selling reprints of the articles they publish to the drug companies, so the drug company salespeople can hand it out. And the docs believe that the journal articles are true. And the docs and guidelines are admissible in court in these malpractice cases. And I agree there needs to be malpractice reform. But the guidelines that are admissible in court as evidence of good or bad practice are essentially the drug companies, a compendium of the drug companies' version of their clinical trials without any independent analysis of the data. So we've got a hidden problem that's underneath all of this. And David, when we talk about how to straighten out the healthcare system and that we can provide universal services like catastrophic health insurance and preventive healthcare, yes, but if we don't straighten out the knowledge problem and ensure that doctors are getting independently analyzed scientific reports, we can't begin to fix this problem.
Well, I would agree with that. And I need to get going. I apologize. I had to jump out for a minute, something I had to deal with. But I look forward to y'all continuing the discussion. Let me just mention, I get a lot of these challenging assignments. One of the assignments I forgot to mention about healthcare was I was co-chair of the Institute of Medicine's End of Life Committee. Now, that was a fun assignment, but there are a lot of critical issues because we do have an aging society and up recently longer lifespans. And obviously people who are older tend to have more underlying health issues, more chronic health issues, if you will. So we have a disproportionate amount of costs happening there. And part of the issue is, what do we do about that? You obviously want to help people to the extent that you can meaningfully improve or extend life. But there are also circumstances where things are done that don't meet that criteria. And so, I agree the need for more independent standard setting, more data-driven decision-making, if you will, in the whole system. And thanks a lot for everybody. I got to get on the road now.
Thanks, David. All right.
See you next
Take care, Dave.
See you
Thank
soon.
you. Thank you. I'm just wondering if there's any hearings in Congress right now on our healthcare system that is broken.
There are. But the problem is everybody's so tied up with all the other nonsensical propaganda of, whatever else they can pull up so they can slip all the other BS under the rug without us seeing it. But I agree with everything that we're talking about here, but and David hits the nail on the head. But right now, our situation is we are not going to have any more doctors left in this country because it's not worth it. It's not worth to go to college for, and the amount of money and the stress that they're put under. They're not allowed to practice the way they want to because insurance dictates it, and they're not allowed to do their own, treatments. And a lot of them wouldn't even need a lot of clinical trials if they could just get out there and practice their own medicine. So, I think that we're barking up a lot of the wrong trees. We need to make it more affordable for them to go to school. We bring students over here from other countries. They get free education. They don't pay to live here. And then they go back to their other country and they get to treat for free, or they get to live here and not have student debt and work as a doctor here, making, 4 times the amount of money that our doctors are making because they don't have a student debt to pay back. So I think we need to revamp our whole system. We need to make it affordable for doctors to go to school. We need to make it affordable for us to have healthcare. And I think the universal system is the best. And we need to get rid of the insurance companies. They don't, who needs to get sued for malpractice? The insurance companies. Because they tell our doctors how
It's
we get
it's
treated
it's
and what
25%, approximately
that's when
25%.
we get sued.
25% of the cost approximately is insurance company cost. But the media also has a
Yeah.
direct conflict of interest. In the area that I work in, we're supposed to disclose material conflict of interest. Okay. Well, I've never seen any of our news shows disclose we have material conflict of interest with the pharmaceutical companies.
Well, we
And
don't.
hence programming related to pharmaceutical industry and their malbehavior will not be shown. There's no disclosures at all. If it was
Well,
a
that's the
security,
reason why
you'd
we
have
had
to
all those
disclose your
doctors.
conflict of interest, and they
Right.
have a big one. So now you have the general public, which is everybody out listening, that are totally unaware of the problems that exist and will always be unaware of the problems exist because media will not deliver the problems to you.
Exactly.
They're paid off. They're basically have a conflict of interest. And then you go to Congress. And I did a little work in Congress, John. I went up to the United States Senate. Okay. I was part of NAFA PAC. Okay. IPAC, which is the 12th largest PAC in the country. So I was a member of the insurance company PACChem. All right. And I quit. I wasn't doing it anymore because here's what we did, John. We wrote checks to senators. We wrote checks to congressmen for access, and we got access. And as NAFA PAC, we wrote some big checks, like $600,000 to one senator to come to our meeting and deliver a short speech. And part of it was to influence the senators and congressmen to not vote on certain issues from the insurance industry standpoint. John, it's amazing how little people will, and how big, depending on what senator you are and congressman you are, will sell their souls for money. Okay. In other words, like, and after a while, frankly, I just get tired of meeting every month and we go over the people in Congress and who we're going to write checks to, who's going to be in favor of us. They're going to get checks. The ones that aren't going to get checks. I mean, that's going on all day. We were the 12th largest PAC, but we weren't the largest PAC. There were PACs ahead of us that were writing big checks. So guess who's paid off? Your congressmen are. And I've invited people, if you ever want to, go meet Senator. That's the reason you'll see my picture with Senator Tillis, my picture with Senator Burr, my pictures with all the congressmen. It was all bought and paid for by NAFA PAC. We're not the only ones doing it. Everybody, I just said, everybody's doing it. And your congressman is paid off by the pharmaceutical.
John, did I hear you correctly that the data itself is not published and not peer reviewed? It's kept private?
That's correct. That's correct. And when I lecture to doctors and ask the room, how many people here know that peer reviewers don't have access to the data, so they can't reanalyze the data. They just have to take what is submitted in the manuscript that's going to be published or submitted for publication. About 2 out of 100 people know that. And it's been impolite to even say that in public. The little vignette that I presented in the beginning of the Imprimis article, where I was a patient, I was in the ICU about 6 months ago, and a doc came in to try and get me on more cholesterol lowering drugs. And I just had a really complicated ablation procedure with one person going on the inside of my heart and one person going through my chest wall. And it was like a nightmare. And I was just coming out of that. I was like 36 hours out of that. This doc comes in to try to convince me to lower my cholesterol. And I can see the monitor out of the corner of my eye, so I can see whether I'm having any recurrence of ventricular tachycardia. And I say he's trying to convince me to take more drugs. And I'm saying, do you know that the articles that you're basing your argument on have not been independently vetted, that the peer reviewers don't get to see the data? And he said, yes, I do. And I said, I just let it out and said, how can you possibly see patients and present yourself as a learned intermediary when you know that you do not have access to independently vetted data? And he just shrugged his shoulders, and that was the end of the conversation. And that's in the Imprimis article. Folks, read that. You can get it online. But it's just shocking. And doctors don't understand that. It's impolite to say that in an academic setting.
I'm sorry, they don't understand, or they just don't care? They're not stupid.
They're not stupid, but they're in a social milieu where that's not possible. Just the way you're saying, did I hear you right?
Right.
The docs don't have a place in their brain to think about the peer-reviewed data not having access to, not being independently analyzed. They just can't see it. It's a sociological problem. It's this paradigm issue about where knowledge comes from. And the bottom line of the abstract, the conclusion of the abstract, that's evidence-based medicine. And for them to contemplate that the peer reviewers and the guideline writers don't have access to the data, it undermines their entire their bully pulpit that they've worked so hard to achieve. It just undermines that completely. We have to start over again. And we do. We're not going to straighten this out. Doctors, insurers, nobody can practice good medicine. We talk about transparency in pricing, there's no transparency in scientific data. And scientific data that's not transparent isn't scientific data.
Is it not worthless then? Pretty much, I think.
Sometimes they find some things that are inconsistent or something, and people have opinions about what conclusions you can draw from the non-transparent data. But yes, it's worthless. There shouldn't be medical journals. There's a market failure. And I really want to pick you conservative folks, experienced economic expert minds about this. The journals are making money by not demanding peer review of articles. They're selling reprints of their articles. They're selling advertisements. They're maintaining their impact factor by being attractive to big clinical trials. This is a market failure. It's a straight market failure. The journals are making money. The drug companies are making money, and the American people are getting hurt. What can we do?
Well, the thing is, you can have an independent group of people, but that are true peer reviewers. See, the problem I've seen when I wrote.
No, Nick, that doesn't work because they can't get the data.
Well, the thing is, you have to allow them access to data.
Yeah.
When I wrote articles as a professor at Northeastern University for the Journal of Accountancy, they brought in a peer review group. But I can tell you, peer review is limited because sometimes their knowledge, the peer review person's knowledge is limited as what they're reviewing, and they're relying very heavily on the person who wrote the article to do all the heavy lifting. And they don't have a lot of incentives because a lot of them are volunteers that do the peer review to begin with. In other words, a lot of them are professors at other universities. Yeah. So the system is not designed to actually do a great peer review.
I've stated in the affirmative, the system is designed not to do a great peer review. But in terms of medicine, there is an easy way out of this, because when a drug company does a clinical trial that has any potential to have regulatory impact, they prepare what's called a clinical study report. They take their patient experience forms and that have been put in electronic data sets, and they tabulate those electronic data sets into these clinical study reports that are up to 3,000 pages long. And in litigation, the first thing I would ask for is the clinical study report. When they're searchable, you can go through them pretty quickly, and you can find about 90% of the problems that have been lost in the lack of transparency and peer review through those clinical study reports. There's no reason in the world for journals not to require clinical study reports be submitted with manuscripts for publication. And somebody who is experienced in this, as I did more litigation, you can get through those 3,000 pages in 10 or 20 hours, and you can pretty much suss out whether what's in the manuscript is supported by the protocol and the statistical analysis plan and the data that they actually had. So there's a solution that's obvious. I asked a journal editor, not a chief editor, but an editor of a major journal who I was at a meeting with, why don't you guys just require the clinical study reports to be submitted with the manuscripts? It would solve about 80 or 90% of the problem. Simple. And he said, before I got to the next step, he said it would be a death spiral for the journal. They would lose their source of income and prestige if they had to publish the truth.
Because?
I'm sorry?
Is that
Because
Because they wouldn't be, because the big clinical trials would go to journals that don't require transparency, and they would publish their clinical trials there and sell their reprints, buy their reprints from a lesser journal, and the major journals would be all dressed up with nowhere to go. So
this is because, I'm sorry, I should have expound. This is because the data does not support what they're saying?
Because the data doesn't necessarily support what they're saying. When it really counts, it's only when it really counts that you need the data. And that's when the system breaks down.
Thank you.
So when we talk about transparency and pricing and all the other kinds of transparency that are needed to straighten out this and make the healthcare market work like a better functioning market, the first transparency we need is scientific transparency. And we all have to be shouting at the top of our lungs, doctors, you've got to wake up. Nobody's going to hand you transparency. You've got to say, you can't do your job today if you don't have access to transparent analyses of data.
Yeah. But are we looking at a multiple problems with our healthcare system? Some are very obvious, like drugs advertising on television, insurance companies with a 25% markup, and some of them are things like you're discussing, how the drugs are determined in the United States. Between all of this, we see this $2 trillion problem, do we not?
Correct. And it's all market failure. Milton Friedman, I came at all this from the liberal side. I'm now in the middle. I have no partisanship. But Milton Friedman wrote in 1962 in Capitalism and Freedom, there are three legitimate functions of government: maintain law and order, maintain competitive markets, and enforce private contracts. And we're not doing any of those things. If we would just do those things, we'd be halfway home.
Yeah, I mean, there's some transparency that's always lacked in the research field. You know, Nick and I, we kind of saw this also in the financial industry where they have the Green Book. Remember the Green Book? So I think that there is a lack of transparency, which maybe we should demand that, you know, all of this information be provided more openly. Kind of like a particular drug that I was watching being developed over the years for the lungs. And it was supposed to come out about the same time that COVID hit. And they had done the clinical trials for 12 years. 12 years they did clinical trials. It had passed. It was going through FDA approval. And then COVID hit, and it would heal lungs from all kinds of damages. All of a sudden, all the information about it disappeared. We paid for it. Our tax dollars paid for all the research, and it disappeared when COVID came out. Like, oh, and now I'm waiting for it to come out now that we have all these damaged lungs under somebody owns it now. But I actually was smart enough. I'll probably get shot tomorrow. I didn't just save the places on the internet. I actually took photos and pictures of the documents, downloaded what I thought to download. I didn't download everything because you just think it's always going to be there. But you're right. There's a lack of transparency. There is, we need to know a lot. We pay for a lot. Our tax dollars actually pay for a lot of this. And everything should be an open book. Just like, anything in politics should be an open book, but it's not. And the people who control those purse strings, the people who control this, they own the purse strings to the pharmaceutical companies, to the insurance companies, because they want to control everything, because they want to keep the money in their world. So, I think if you follow, this is something somebody called me the other day and said, Kim, you wrote a book on this. If you want to know where anything is happening, where any criminal act is happening, injustice, follow the money. Mm-hmm. Just trace the money. And I will guarantee you all of the problems that you're dealt with is coming from the pharmaceutical and the insurance industry, because that's where all the money is going. And I don't think it's the doctors. I really don't. I don't think it's the doctors' fault. None of this is. You know what the doctors want? They want to be able to practice medicine, do a little bit of research, write some papers, and afford their home and cars. That's it. Really, that's it. All of this mess is not caused by doctors. It's caused by the wealthy, rich people who sell insurance. And yeah, Nick, you too.
Kim, I want
was the health insurance.
I want to take exception.
No, you don't. I'm joking. I'm joking. But I'm just saying that this is not a problem caused by the doctors. The doctors, if you sit down and have a one-on-one conversation with them like I do, you will learn that they're ready to throw in the towel. They're ready to quit. They're ready to quit. They're done. And the only place we're going to get medicine and medical care is in another country. So none of this research is going to matter anyway, because we're going to have to go to India or China where they can afford to be doctors because they got the education for free in our country.
Yeah,
so
I want to take
that's going to matter in the end of all of this, because in 8 years, because my doctors at Duke, they're dropping off like flies. You can't even get an appointment unless it's 6 months out now. Your all appointments, even for regular routine care, has to be scheduled out in 6 months. And if you have to change it, not going to happen. There's not enough doctors. There's a ton of admin, a ton of pencil pushers, a ton of bill collectors.
Kim, you can change them in terms of the hours. It just sometimes take months, because I know that I had to reschedule my eye appointment. I think it's actually due for May, and it was just a regular eye appointment, but it was originally scheduled, I think, for February or something along those lines. So yeah, you can change the appointment. It's just that the time frame is vastly different. And
yeah, but most eye care is not controlled by insurance companies. In fact, if you look, unless you're in a company that buys insurance for eye care, and dental care is the same way. Yeah, you can change those appointments because they're not controlled by insurance companies, and they get their money for the most part.
I'm not sure about that, because when I got the eye appointment, I want to say that insurance was actually something that they requested. And it was one of those big, eye care chain type deal. No, it was an independent ophthalmologist, right? But I think
some of them are at a network, and then they take cash. They'll submit your insurance, but they take cash from you.
Right.
Yeah, they take cash from and right. most eye care. I mean, some companies and some insurance companies cover it, but like if you go into the Obamacare, majority of that, the only people who get eye care is children. So if you go read all of these documents and read in detail, the only people who get any eye care under the Obamacare are children. I think Medicare, you can get eye care coverage, but it's like one of those Plan A, Plan B. God forbid I even try to read that. They have consultants now. That's how complicated it is to be able to even pay for your medical care. But I agree with you. There's a lack of transparency. It frustrates me. But what frustrates me more is our doctors not being able to, their hands are tied. They're not even able to practice. And most of them can't even pay their bills anymore. So, in 8 years, you're not going to be able to get medical care in the United States. 10.
Kim, one thing I'd like to add to your analysis of the situation the doctors are in is they have this enormous amount of debt. I think they average $200,000 in debt.
Yeah.
And that forces them into the lucrative specialties. And it forces them away from primary care, which would provide care in a timely fashion and would save a whole lot of money in the healthcare system. So I think that student debt is kind of like the malpractice system, where it serves to stabilize a dysfunctional system.
No,
John, I'm sorry, NYU in Manhattan does not charge anymore tuition for medical students. I don't know if there are other colleges that do that also.
Do they have to stay in New York State?
They don't charge.
Do they have to stay in New York State and practice a certain number?
I don't know the details.
In South Carolina, they do. So if you get your education for free in South Carolina, you're required to stay in South Carolina. So a lot of the states that do give the free education through the state schools, not the private. Now, the specialty doctors, I will tell you this, a lot of the doctors that I know that have been dropping out of the big practices are going to open up their private practices where they do not take insurance. And there's a program up the road from me where the doctors got together and you just pay them, a monthly fee, and they take care of majority of, that way you're just on a payment plan for, preventive cares and things like that. But a lot of the doctors are saying, I can't afford to even be in a big system.
Not that, but Kim, a lot of them are also paying for their mental health as well, because even before the pandemic, I was reading that was saying that physicians were at twice the risk of burnout compared to the general population. About 40% of those surveyed reported depression and suicidal ideation, meaning that they were definitely
a young woman recently that I've known for a very long time that became a doctor, and she's struggling. Mm-hmm. She spent all of these years becoming a doctor, and she can barely keep her head above water raising her family. It should not be that way. I don't think that they should be so overly graciously paid above and beyond everyone else. But they shouldn't be, so in debt they can't afford their mortgage, their kids, and to go on vacation. I mean, they need to be able to do and they can't. And Mark, you're right. You want to know why? Because when I talked to them, none of them understood the student loan they got. So they were making minimum payments. They're not financially literate. They're medically literate. And I don't want them to be financially literate. I want them to be medically more literate. They're making minimum payments thinking, it's going to be paid off in 10 years, and they owe more. Like the one person I talked to, she said, I paid and paid and paid for 5 years, and I said, now I have 285. Why?
Yeah, but other schools, I know they're teaching them. But other schools,
the government indentured slaved you.
No, but that's one of the things I was curious about. And maybe I guess John has some thoughts on everything.
That's what needs to happen first.
Yeah.
Nick,
No,
line up your class action lawsuits.
But are they even being taught about regulations and things like that? Because I know a lot of, I'm around the corner from Duke, and I know they're taught a lot around the medicine and everything in that space. And I actually have some friends that work for some pharmaceutical companies, and I don't know that they're taught enough about regulations and requirements even when they're in medical school. I know they're ethics courses, but I don't know if they are learning enough about what they are facing to what John is talking about. And the other thing is, I don't think it's just the insurance companies that are in the battle of the need to tie in the money aspect, because I also think the education system plays a part as well, because I know a number of students that are getting Ritalin, and I just think that they're just hyper kids, and I don't know a kid yet that isn't hyper, but I think that Ritalin is one of those drugs that is given to folks needlessly in some cases. I'm not saying all the time, but in some cases it's needless. So I was just wondering John's thoughts about some of the points that I was picking up.
Mark, what you're saying is absolutely right. The medical curriculum doesn't include, in fact, it miseducates students about the nature of scientific data and transparency and guidelines. This is mistaught, and I've been on the faculty for 25 years, and I've watched generations of medical students get mistaught about where the information comes from that they rely on to make treatment decisions that are really important for their patients. So the problem here is all the things that Kim is saying they're all correct. But the problem is that there's this massive nexus of market failure where the academic medical institutions are making money because they're participating in this private research. They have to, because the drug companies pulled their research out of the academic medical centers and gave it to private research companies. So the academic medical centers need to compete with those private research companies on the pharmaceutical companies' terms. So like half of the half of the contracts for clinical research with academic medical centers by drug companies, half of those contracts say that the drug company has the right to write up the article, and the authors of the article have the right to suggest revisions, but they don't have to accept the revisions. So what the medical students are socialized into is a system that gives the drug companies and other commercial interests, hospitals and insurance companies too, but that gives them the say in how the students are taught that medical practice should be run, whether it's administratively or whether it's scientifically. And we've got a system where we've got too much unregulated market, so that all the players can make money while students are miseducated and forced into the high revenue specialties that are very lucrative for the hospitals and the drug companies. And the people end up with a healthcare system that costs $2.3 trillion too much each year, and we're losing ground in terms of our comparative health to other wealthy nations. It's a failure, and we've got to get together. The conservatives and the progressives have got to get together and figure out how to solve this problem.
And with that, we're at the hour, so we don't want to thank our special guest, Dr. John Abramson, and his great book, Sickening, which is a book that everybody should get. It's available on Amazon.com. And we'll see you next week on Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker. Until then, stay healthy.
John, it was a pleasure meeting you.
All right.
Walking, take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.